Welcome, Chris.
Good to be here, buddy.
And with us is Darren Cherry, our special guest, area president with Focus CFO. Welcome, Darren.
Hey.
Cheers, Darren.
Happy Pandemic Thursday. Glad to be here.
I'm glad we're making it light today. We're making it light. Darren, we've known each other for a long time. We've worked together, and I'm just thrilled to have you on this forum today to talk about a topic that that every investor, every business owner thinks about eventually, right? This idea of value creation in the business. And it doesn't matter if you're a public company, doesn't matter if you're a private company. Ultimately, we want to know that what we're building has value outside of the income we're generating and the salaries that we're taking. And that creates a different perspective that we go to work with every day when we think that way. So I'd love to jump into that with you today. But before we jump into the topic, can you introduce yourself to the audience? Let us know a little bit more about your background and what makes you especially qualified, as I know you are, to talk about the subject.
I never know if I'm qualified, but I will share my background. I spent about 35 years in industry, and half of that was on the finance side leading up to CFO, and the other half was on the operations side leading up to CEO. Most of the businesses I was with were somehow related to industry, either industrial services or industrial manufacturing. And for the past almost 5 years now, I've been with Focus CFO, and our mission at Focus is really to help business owners be successful. And one of those elements is helping them to improve the value of their business.
Yeah, and we know each other from working together in that business context. And I'll just say off the top to folks listening that there are times everyone has these times in their lives when they meet someone and work with someone who just kind of blows their mind and takes them to this next level, and consistently demonstrates an understanding and an ability to help and to serve that's just unexpected and in my experience unparalleled. And I'm impressed, Darren, with your ability to kind of navigate and add value in so many different areas across an organization and kind of demystify the challenges that especially small business owners face and leadership teams face. And I can see you're blushing, man. But I mean this sincerely. But give me a sense of where that comes from. Where does your mindset have to be to have that kind of impact? How do you achieve that?
That's a lot of accolades, and it's a really tough question for a poor boy like me from a small town in Indiana that's just fortunate enough to do reasonably well. But look, the mindset simply has to be that you are 100% committed to what your goal, what your vision, and what your objective is. Because if you're not committed to it, then it's something you're interested in. Without commitment, it's just an interest. I have an interest in making phone sales, but I'm not committed to it because I'm not doing it every single day. It's an interest. And so, that's the thing about it is once you have the commitment, then you go out and figure out how to do it. If people ask me how to do something, they'll ask me to do something, and I may not know. I just say, yeah, and I go learn how to do it. And that's what it takes in order to be successful in that.
I love that, because there are so many times when I've thought that I'm committed to something, and then you get tested in it, and you refine it and make it better, and then you have to choose to commit to it at a deeper level or decide if it's an interest. Because I know in my own life, I inspired and enthused with the idea. And then when it hits the street and you find out this is way harder than I thought it would be, that commitment gets tested. I'm curious what about something bigger, but this will be fast. What's the small town in Indiana?
Gary, Indiana.
Gary, Indiana. I was in Paoli, Indiana for a while, which is like the craziest small town.
Yeah.
It basically has an ice hill that people pay to ski. Darren, when you're as a fractional CFO cracking into a business and starting to see it for the first time, from a metaphor, do you find you're kind of putting a puzzle together to find what the real picture is? Or is it more like an archaeologist, you're going on this dig to find a treasure that they didn't know was there?
That's a great question. Maybe this helps. If you've ever done mountain climbing, you have a guide. And that guide asks you a lot of questions before you start. And the questions are around understanding where you came from, but more importantly, wanting to clearly know where you want to go and the degree of difficulty you want in that journey. So that person is really like that Sherpa. And they're right there with you. You know, they're not giving you the route and say, okay, I'll see you later. They're right there with you and having constant checkpoints. You sure you still want to go this way? Now, there's an easier terrain if you go this direction. And that's kind of what we're doing. We're part of the solution, helping the owner with those things that they shouldn't be spending their time on, and putting in the systems and equally being accountable.
I think, Darren, I think for me, one of the things that I think don't think we've talked a lot about is the layer on top of that, which is there's something that I experience with advisors and coaches who really have helped me over the years. And it's a level of experience that they bring to the table, but it's the self-awareness to process the experiences that they've had to figure out why things turned out the way they did, so they can glean lessons from those experiences that can then be applied on future engagements. And I've said a lot of positive things about my experiences working with you, but I think a lot of those are based on a unique ability that you have to kind of foresee challenges or to ask just a couple deft questions that really expose something that's missing. And I think it hasn't always had to be a grandiose gesture, but just sometimes those real key observations. And I think those are born from the way you process the experiences you've had over the last number of years. Is that fair?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from on that, Jim. It's the thing that we all have to keep in mind is as business owners, and I do this myself, I want to think that my challenges are unique. No one else has any of the challenges I have. And there's an aspect of that that's true, and that is the combination of challenges for me are unique. But there's a finite amount of things that can go wrong in a business. And what you have is a unique combination of those. So there clearly is someone out there that has already experienced and been successful at some of those. And so in cases, maybe that's what it is. But more importantly, you have to think of it this way. On the one hand, there's a consultant who has a prescribed path of success. On the other hand, there's a mentor that will tell you exactly what they did to achieve success. And on that other extreme is someone that is going to help you yourself come up with the solution that you have. You just maybe don't realize it or don't have enough time to put the problem in such a focus that you get to it. And I think, that's what I help people do is realize what's the best solution for them and understand what the set of the problems is. You remember when we were in grad school, they gave us the problem.
Right.
You don't get the problem given to you in business. You've got to first ascertain what that is. You do that through discovery and understanding.
Right. The real problem. Right. And then that gets back to your point about commitment. Are we committed to solving the real problem?
Yep.
That's really interesting.
That brings up something I'd like to ask both of you on. And I'd like to hear it from each of your different perspectives. Because Jimmy, I know you approach this sales, Darren, with the components of the business, operations, finances. How many, whatever the statistic is, 90% of businesses fail. How many of them had a good idea, something that mattered or was effective at some level, but their finances weren't structured right? They ran out of cash. Another component or piece was off, sales. If people could have you, Jimmy, in those 90% of times when that failure happened, or Darren, you, what would the number really be? Does that make sense? I mean, I know that'd be hard to know, but it may be even intuitively, whichever one you want to go first. I'd love to hear what you think about that.
I'll leave it to Jim.
Well, look, I learned a long time ago, businesses don't, it was when I left grad school in 91. Speaking of grad school, Darren, I left with a business plan that didn't get funded. So I did the next best thing. I started a consulting practice and started working with the kind of companies that reflected my history. So I came from a fourth generation family business. And I learned very quickly, businesses do not fail because of lack of funding. And then when I came here to Columbus, and my first client was Brad Martin, the founder of Focus CFO, who taught me so much more about the realities of finance. And I have an enormous number of lessons that I gained from the time that we've spent together. So what I would say to you is that I think it connects back to something Darren said earlier, right? There's a finite number of things that can go wrong with a business or with an idea. But on the human side, Chris, where you do such a great job, there are an infinite number of ways we can get it wrong. Right. And so I think it comes down to the decisions we make and the actions we take and the motivations behind those. I worked with Darren in situations where the founder wanted to double the size of their business and exit with a level of wealth that would sustain them for the rest of their lives and allow them to play and have fun. They might have been committed to the idea of playing and have fun, but were they committed to the work it was going to take to get there? Right. So I always come back to that human condition and the mindset of the folks involved and of the individuals and then of the team or the organization they end up creating as they begin to work together.
I dig it. What about you, Darren?
I avoided the question, Darren. Maybe you can answer
that. Well, I can't say to what extent someone would be more successful. But let me say this. The majority of the businesses that are not successful, I won't say that they fail. I'll say that they're not successful. And the lack of success typically comes from the degree to which they were successful implementing the strategy, more so than whether or not it was a good strategy. Give me an average strategy with a great execution any day. So both James and I put you in a better position to execute on that strategy. So that's where the advantage comes from.
Oh, I love it so much. I mean, that both of those answers resonate with me, and I think speaks against the false approach. It has the appearance of wisdom, but false hype in so much business publishing of stories, because it makes it sound like it's something else when it does come down to the motives, like you said, of the leader and what they're actually doing, Jimmy, and then the execution. What a great way of saying that. An average strategy with execution matters so much more. I have it actually on my computer as a little post-it. I can look down and see it. It says it right here. Small moves are better than fancy moves. Just as a way to remind myself,
Right.
keep with it.
Well, look, part of I really appreciate that, the question, Chris, and the insight that came from that. I think we forget about that, but execution is critical. It's really the founding concept for our business was strategy execution, right? Because that's where we fail. And I learned that in over 15 years of working in venture-backed startups where we had plenty of money. And it's funny how you can blow through that money, right, Darren? It doesn't matter how much you have. You can blow through it if your execution's off. It doesn't matter. It's about that leadership and focusing on getting shit done. So Darren, let's focus on this idea of value creation. Moving the rock is all about moving toward a goal, right? Carrying a deal, carrying a goal, carrying a business toward an ultimate objective. I love it when I meet a business leader who's thinking about value creation. What does value creation mean to you? And then let's jump into, what are fair and unfair expectations of a sales team or a sales leadership, in terms of how they can help deliver on that goal.
Fair or unfair?
Yeah, man. I'm gonna. I'll explain. But give us what you mean by value creation, man.
One thing you have to think about when you're thinking about the value of a company, let's back up and think about what a buyer looks for and answer the question from that perspective. So if you think about it, buying a business is 100% about the probability of success. And so when I look at a business, I say, well, is this something that I can't go out on my own and replicate it? And then when we go from there, we say, no, we can't do that. So then when we look at a business, we say, okay, what makes this business valuable to me is, yes, is it attractive? Is it transferable? And does it have a minimal amount of risk that will interfere with my probability of success? And that's the lens that we look at it from. So when we look at that, that may explain why value is more about a company than it is a job. So oftentimes we have businesses, especially in the small, lower middle market space, where they're borderline a job as opposed to a business. And some of those elements that we'll get into maybe a little bit later really determine how quickly you can be growing profit, but the value of the company doesn't really change, because the value isn't, I could calculate a value until I'm blue in the face, but at the end of the day, the value of a company is what somebody else puts down on the table as an offer to you.
Right. So what kinds of things impact this idea of transferability, for example?
Yeah, so think about it this way. A business value is probably somewhere between 20 to 40%. So let's just say 30% based on its assets. So the lion's share of that value is based on its intangibles, and it's human capital. That's the structure, that's the customers, and that's the brand itself, the social capital side of it. So things that sort of detract from that is my ability to replicate and do better with that business in the absence of whoever I'm buying it from. So things that will detract from it. You ever notice that in the early stage, we take pride in knowing all of our customers. How many times have you met a business owner and you say, well, you know, what's your relationship with the customers? And they tell you how intimate they are with the customers. So let me ask you this. If I have someone that the founder, the owner themselves is 100% responsible for business development, is that a problem? We would call that owner dependency.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it can be owner or a key employee. Is that fair to say?
Well, and that's the other step. So typically what an owner will do is they'll go hire a vice president of sales. You know, we'll tell them, hey, you know, you and I tell them, hey, you know, you really need to, you cannot, the value of your company will not grow without someone else being responsible for business development. So what do? They go find a mini-me. They find a vice president of sales, and it's a wildly successful person.
Mm-hmm.
So now they've transferred it from owner dependency to what? Employee dependency. So now I've got a key person that still be there. So then the next step in that process really, and it doesn't have to be the next step. You actually, you know, we had a business owner, and let's call him Alex, for example. Alex went out and hired someone that they knew from the industry trade association they were in, and did a phenomenal job. Annie had the same problem, but what Annie did is she developed a sales process, and instead of hiring one, she hired two, with an ambition of hiring three. And both of them were successful. And if we looked at them on paper with the exact same profitability, which one would be more valuable? Well, it would be Annie, because Annie has developed a structure that means someone can come in and be trained quickly. There are inherent backups built into the system. So if one salesperson goes, the other one takes that up, and they can also come in and train. So I, as a buyer, don't necessarily have to have that legacy knowledge. And so, you know, that's how you just chip away at those risk areas.
Got it. Chris, you look like you had an awakening.
Man, Darren, that was beautiful. That's the most succinct way I've ever heard that stated, from buying the business to the difference of the owner dependency to the employee dependency versus the sales process, which I know is, you know, what I was butting up against in organizations I was serving and working with. It was so dependent on heroics and likability. And that's why, you know, years ago when Jimmy and I met, no, not that long ago, I was so captured by a process, right? Because that's what you're saying. It's process. Yeah. That wasn't hype, that wasn't gross, that wasn't forced, but that mapped onto a human to help them perform and achieve, but still be a good human. And Jimmy, glad you're recording this, because you just play that. You know, we're going to help you.
Wisdom, right?
That was good. That was so good. I got a lot of questions around it, but I won't take us where we don't need to go.
Oh, go for it, man.
Well, I you know, because where my mind goes into it, Darren, is the leader, because this is what I see in the work that I do. I tend to work with the owner and the founder at getting past, we don't always use this language, but getting past the own BS of their ego that keeps them from being able to, you know, keep it dependent on them, be a 6-gun shooter and bring in, you know, rock stars, versus actually think about it in a progressive, process, systematic way. I'm curious, first question could be, and if we get to any other ones, that's great. What do you do if somebody comes to you and the owner isn't really getting the vision of the healthiest path? Because we can only do so much if they don't want to take that path. What are some of your strategies to help them see a better way?
Well, Here's the one thing I know. I work with the owner, and so if there's a thought process that the owner is not seeing a vision, then the problem is in the mirror. Stops right here. Because part of the challenge with businesses is that you do have to step back and really define what your DNA is. Now, some folks call that vision, some folks call it culture, but you have to define that. Because what I get a lot is someone will tell me the horror stories of, I tried to hire someone to be my COO. I tried to hire someone to lead my sales organization, and it didn't work out. And many, many years ago, we all subscribed to the right people on the bus in the right seat, right? But boy, we had a huge amount of difficulty executing that in practice. And so, identifying the right people is all about, firstly, identifying what is the vision, what is the culture of your company, and then that it becomes the litmus test of how you bring people in. And then identifying clearly what the role's accountable for, and what type of work that role consists of, and who. And so you have to match, and that's what's meant by the right seat in the bus. And that is, not only do you have the capabilities, but is the work that is necessary out of that seat the kind of work that you're going to be successful doing, and that's your DNA. And so it's understanding those two. And that's how we try to get the owners to build the vision of what their culture is, and not just articulate it, but educate folks about what it is. Because you can't say your culture is these four things, and then when we take the inventory of all your management team members, they only have one or two of them at best.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Because then that's your aspirational culture. That's not your factual as is culture.
That's so stated so well. It's always funny to me. Jimmy and I have talked about this when I'm with a CEO or owner, and I ask them, the vision, the culture. Well, it's on the wall right there. And I'm in one meeting with them, and they refer to 2 or 3 phrases over and over and over, and they're not even on that. And it's not to demonize it. It's just to point it out and go, hey, we all can do those things, but we got to be aware of doing it. What do both of you think is the greatest weakness in an organization not being transferable?
Right.
To use your 3 things. And whichever one you want to go first.
Well, Darren, I'll let you comment on my comment. How about that? The expert commenting on my experiences and what I think happens. I mean, I think one of the biggest things, Chris, and this relates to what Darren just got done talking about. When we hire people, right? Let's say we get to the point where we hire the right people for the right seat. How do you know? Like, what's the litmus test? What are the metrics that tell you got the right person, right? And especially in the context of value creation, if you're building an organization that has value, it can be transferred either to an acquirer, or to the next generation of your family, or to be managed by your team through an ESOP, whatever it is. How do you know it can be transferred, and how do you know people are successful? And so often in sales, we find that the strategy for building a sales organization, because most people don't know how to do that, is let's just hire someone, throw them into the job, and see if it happens, see if they work, see if they stick, right? And how do we know they're successful? Well, they're selling stuff. Well, how are they selling stuff? Who knows? Who cares? The common refrain is, I don't care what you're doing as long as you hit your number. Well, guess what? If you've got 10 people on your sales force, you've got 10 black boxes that you have no idea how they work. And someone who buys that may be buying your revenue and your customer base, but they're not buying a systematic process that you've identified, your sales intellectual property that allows you to go to market and create predictable, repeatable returns on the investments you're making in your business. You just got lucky and cobbled together this team. Maybe you've got 2 people that are top producers, 5 people in the middle that are mediocre, suck some years or great other years because they get lucky, they step in something. And then a couple people who, could be fired, but you're keeping around because you don't want to go through the hiring process again. Whatever it is, right? So oftentimes we want to be more specific about how we determine success. Are you following a process that can be predictable and repeatable over time? And how well are you following it? How well are we innovating it? How dynamic is that process? Because that process is ultimately going to produce the outcomes that we want. So that's one way that we kind of tie this together from a sales perspective.
Which makes me think about this whole idea, and I hope I wasn't cutting you off, Darren, because I definitely want to hear what you would say. You learn best what's counterfeit by studying what's true. So just see what makes a powerful transferable organization set up, because you're going to see the ones that don't work.
Right. I think that's where Darren's really good. Where I've seen him in action is, Darren can ask a couple of questions and identify those black boxes, and then help. And in my experience, I've seen him help leaders and owners identify those barriers, those shadows, those gaps, and then think about how to improve them.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, James. And but yeah, one of the things I probably should back up and say that most of the business owners I'm working with, they've done a phenomenal job building a business. And we're not talking about the 60% that is not being done right. We're talking about that 20 to 30% that could be improved upon. And so from that perspective, some of the common themes of where those challenges come into play is number one, it's processes, as Jim has said. And the problem is when we're running really hard, really fast, which is the life of an entrepreneur, we think of processes as something that you do for ISO. Oh my God, let me get to that when I get a chance to it. As opposed to being something that clearly says what you do versus what you don't do. And that is one of the linchpins of a process, is it helps you to not only understand it yourself, but everyone else understand these are the things we're not going to do. We're not going to participate on. So you don't get this creep into the ugly. The second thing is, it's just human nature when a business grows that you typically will outgrow the infrastructure that you've designed. What worked for you when you were $500,000 may not work very well for you when you're $3, $4, and $5 million in revenues. And oftentimes we sort of see the systems, the processes are not fit for the organization that is either the size it is or the aspirations of where they really want to take it to. And then the big area that is a challenge, and this deals directly with transparency, and that is we don't do a great job of defining what the measurements are. And because of that, we struggle holding people accountable. And that's all part of where we struggle sometimes with delegating. And the thing that Balanced Scorecard was great, but the one thing that it did as perhaps a cruel joke on us is it gave everyone this concept that, well, if I'm sales, I should be using this 1, 2, 3 metrics, and that your KPI should be relevant to the behavior you want to do within that period of time. Mm-hmm. So if I want to grow sales, how am I going to grow sales? Am I going to grow the average selling price of an order? Am I going to grow the number of orders? How am I doing it? And then drill down on exactly what you're focusing on, and then that becomes your measures. And then it's a lot easier when you have measures that are measuring the behavior you want folks to do to hold them then accountable for doing or not doing that behavior.
That is a line that we use with leaders is you can always tell when a leader doesn't know what they're doing when they make up for a lack of clarity with an increase in intensity. They're not drilling down into those behaviors. They can't get specific. I don't know, figure it out, being intense.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think Darren, your point was great. I mean, we are talking about organizations. The organizations that all of us work with are those that are on the, that are led by, great folks. It's just that there are blind spots that we happen to have an extraordinary insight into, and we can add some value. But I think that's a really good point. Most of the folks we're working with are already successful, but they want to get to that next level. And those are the folks that are just a joy to work with. They come curious, they love the clarity, and it ends up generating a relationship that can last for years and be highly valuable for everyone involved. So Darren, we have you're taking notes, Chris. I love it, baby.
Now, man.
Darren's sending you a bill afterwards.
Yeah. I would say Jimmy knows if I'm taking notes. He's got a good friend. This guest is awesome.
Yeah, we'll be talking, and I also know we'll be talking about it later, right? So I got to make some time in my schedule. I'm sure we'll be jamming on this. Darren, I'd love to give you the last word as we wrap up the conversation today. What would you like CEOs and sales leaders to take away from today as they think about tackling this idea of value, generating value, driving value, establishing value, maybe even going out and buying value?
Well, the number one thing that I think any business owner should have and review, at least on an annual basis, are what I would call the two magic numbers. The first number is what is your value gap? And that is the gap between the value of your company and the best in class. You should always understand that because that's your aspirations. You want to close the gap between where you are today and where the best in class is. And the second gap is so that you always understand this, because at some point, and I don't know when it happens, but at some point in our business journey, one thing happens to us, and that is the value of our business becomes, in many of our cases, 80 to 95% of our wealth. And because of that, you also should clearly understand your wealth gap. And that is what you need to retire versus what the value of your business is. And those two numbers you should update every year because, as a business owner, you should have kind of a business assessment that tells you, hey, this is why the value of my business is how it is. And you begin to work on that. So that way you're growing the value of your company, and as opposed to just growing the sales or just growing the EBITDA.
Mm-hmm. It's awesome. So the idea here is it feels to me like it'd be easy for a business owner to, or I just think of my own experience with health, for example, right? I have a general sense of how healthy I am based on how my pants fit after Thanksgiving or whatever. I'm sure there are a lot of business owners kind of walking around with a general idea or an imagined idea of where their business is. What you're saying, look, it's time for a blood test. It's time to, on a regular basis, go get the checkup so you know exactly. And so if you're moving closer or further away, and then of course looking deeper to see what levers you have to pull to make it happen.
Absolutely, because that assessment kind of, if you're doing it right, you use that assessment, and that becomes your roadmap for what you want to work on the next, couple years.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, Darren. We could go on forever, and I'd love to have you back to continue the conversation. And I'd like to thank everybody for listening today to Moving the Rock, where we've talked with Darren Cherry, area president at Focus CFO, about this idea of building value into our organizations. And we talked a little bit about how the sales organization can be your partner in making that happen. Chris, thank you for being here as well. Darren, can we have you back again?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me, Jim and Chris. I've enjoyed it. And you guys keep doing good, being well, and staying safe.
Thank you very much. Oh, before we go, Darren, how can people get a hold of you if they'd like to reach out with questions?
Yeah, the easiest thing is my email, which is d.cherry@focuscfo.com.
Outstanding. And you can reach out to us if you have any questions. We can put you in touch with Darren as well. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Be well. We'll see you next time.